Alright, if you are watching this video, you are either watching from my Patreon or my YouTube channel. I don't know if I'm going to put this out on my YouTube channel or just my Patreon, but regardless, I'll figure that stuff out later. Anyways, regardless, it's a pleasure to have you here. And what we're going to be talking about is the shadow self and the various different aspects of the collective intelligence of the shadow self. It is truly when we descend into the shadows that we gain more access to the light of intelligent infinity, that we gain more access to be a channel for our higher self and even other higher density versions of ourselves that are existing that can support our evolutionary process. We gain access to embodying the source energy consciousness, but we cannot do this if we don't descend into the shadows. We cannot do this if we're not building a connection with our shadow self. And to do this, it would be wise of us to know and to understand all of the various layers of the shadow self, because I assure you, it is much more than just trauma. I think the average person, when they think of the shadow self, they think about fragmentation and they think about suppressed trauma and suppressed, emotions and things of that nature. And although that is true, that's really only the outer net of the shadow self. And there's so much more to the shadow self. The shadow self is a higher intelligence that most people are just not fully conscious of or fully able to access, which is why the shadow self is the unconscious. It is the unconscious mind that is actually storing the totality of experience on a universal level and on a personal soul level as well. The entirety of the multiversal structure is existing inside of us, and this energy is in the shadow self, which is its own intelligence, which can guide us, that we can connect with in the same way that a lot of people connect with extraterrestrial intelligence and spirits and things of that nature. There is so much value to be gained in building a connection with the shadow self. Now, let's get right into it. So, there are many different components and aspects to the shadow self, and I'm going to be breaking down these aspects in different layers. So, let's start with this lifetime. In this lifetime, we experience trauma, and because we don't know how to process that trauma, it creates fragmentation within the psyche. And, we fragment into all of these different parts as we don't feel safe to feel different emotions that are in association with the trauma. So we create parts of ourselves that are, identities and personas, and these identities hold belief systems and perceptions and things of that nature. And then there are other parts underneath the surface that are holding the emotional resonance that is in connection with the traumatic experience, that we created the other parts to basically shell us away from feeling. And this is our way of actually surviving that trauma. But surviving it isn't going to release that energetic resonance from the energetic field in general, so it gets stored away and it actually becomes sentient. So we have these different parts of us that are underneath the surface of these identities that we create a lot of the time to survive the trauma, and these parts have a collective sentience. We can say a collective shadow sentience that starts with the emotional resonance of what we didn't know how to feel and what we refuse to authentically feel. Well, that emotional resonance becomes conscious. It becomes like an entity that is stored inside of us. At least that's a way that we can view this kind of sentience. So that's going to be like the outer net of our shadow. It's going to be these repressed aspects of us that are in association with the fragmentation that we go through because of the unhealed trauma that is in our system. Now, there are also primal components of the shadow. So these are going to be the more, we could say, animalistic aspects of our psyche in association with the reptilian brain. And these parts of us are actually very, very ancient, and they date back to the very beginning of our ancestry, in the very beginning of, we could say, the evolution of the human species, the very beginning of the origin of the human species, going back to hunter-gatherer civilizations that are very, very ancient. That energy, even though we view those civilizations as existing in the past, that energy is still alive inside of us, and it influences us in different ways, even though most people are not conscious of that energy, which is why it's stored in what we call the unconscious, in what we call the shadow. But there's a lot of value in connecting with the primal aspects of self, and then kind of moving that energy into things that, we want to achieve, and transmuting that energy into higher states of consciousness by accepting it for what it is and connecting with that primal aspect of our shadow, which is associated with the root chakra. So this is going to be a component of our energetic makeup that we actually need to be in connection with in order to even move into a higher level of consciousness, which is always going to be in connection with all of our chakras being balanced. We can't just operate from the higher chakras and not operate from the lower ones. They all need to be in balance. So once again, these animal components of ourselves, or these primal components of us, are in association with the root chakra, and we need to be balanced within our root chakra by having acceptance for and connecting with this primal component of our shadow self. And this primal component, it has an intelligence. It is a conscious aspect of our shadow. Now that we've talked about the trauma, the fragmentation, and we've also talked about the primal parts, going even deeper than that into the next layer of our shadow is actually going to be the primal parts and the trauma-based parts, or the fragmentations, that are not only in association with this lifetime, but other timelines where we are existing, past and future versions of ourselves that are emanations of our individual soul, having these different experiences in these different timelines. So as we go deeper into our shadow, we're actually transcending space and time. And even though I say past and future, everything is actually happening all at once. We could say in different frequential timelines that we can access by going into the shadow self, where all of that information and all of those different timelines are playing out in the present moment. But I use the term past and future selves just because I'm speaking from a linear perspective, so you can understand what I mean. So the fragmentations that past versions of you are still going through, and the fragmentations that future versions of you may be going through, are all existing inside of you, and it actually creates a collective intelligence based on those suppressed emotional resonances. And then you have the primal aspects of your energetic makeup as well, and of your shadow, that are operating in the very same way, to where they're creating a collective intelligence inside of you. All of this is very important to understand, because as you go deeper and deeper into the shadow, you're also having the ability to build a deeper connection with the totality of what you are. And you're not just yourself as you perceive yourself now, you're actually existing in many, many different timelines. And in a sense, you can merge these timelines, or even we can say, I think a better way of saying it is you can offer support to those versions of yourself simply by connecting with your shadow. So I know this could get a little bit deep, but stay with me here. Your higher self evolves by offering support to versions of itself that are existing in what you would perceive to be the past. So this includes you. This is why we connect with our higher self and we can gain so much value from the experience, because it's actually the role of the higher self, which is essentially what you would perceive to be a future version of you. It is the role of the higher self to offer support to all of the past versions of itself, because that alters its timeline in a very beneficial way. So we can connect with past versions of ourselves, and we can alter our present moment timeline in a very beneficial way as well, by playing the role of higher self to those past versions of ourselves that might need our support in different ways. Now, let's talk about the archetypal layer of our consciousness, the archetypal layer of our energetic makeup. So we have these different archetypal energies that are like the building blocks of our overall energetic structure. And they exist within the unconscious, so the shadow, and they exist as well within the mass collective unconscious. And Carl Jung kind of gets into this topic of how these different archetypes exist within the mass collective unconscious. And these archetypal energies are very important in relation to the development of consciousness, because they make up our overall energetic structure. So when we're connecting with these different archetypes, we're actually connecting with a part of ourselves, and we're getting to understand ourselves on a much deeper level. So these archetypal aspects are almost like living resonances within our shadow self. The 22 major arcana of the tarot deck are actually the building blocks of what we are on a soul level and on an energetic level in general. So these aren't random artistic expressions that were just painted on, a piece of cardboard or anything like that. Tarot is actually a way of channeling the mass collective unconscious and channeling these different shadow aspects of the self, which are the building blocks of what we are. And this is why when it comes to the Kabbalistic system, it's actually these pathways, which are the 22 major arcana of the tarot deck, that connect these different energetic centers. And these energetic centers are directly associated with our chakra system. And this further brings you into what I'm saying about them being the building blocks of our energetic makeup. And you can kind of look at the Kabbalistic tree diagram as almost like a ladder. And each one of these archetypal energies that are the 22 major arcana of the tarot deck are like steps that we're climbing up. Each step, we're becoming more conscious of what we are, and we're able to further embody the source energy consciousness, which the experience of these archetypes is actually leading us to. Now, because at the highest levels that we can think about it, everything is actually us pushed out, because we are the creator source consciousness choosing to fractalize itself in the form of a higher self. And then in relation to the human experience, the higher self fractalizes itself in the form of our soul, in which, we then have many different human experiences that are meant to be evolutionary for the higher self. And it's a way that the higher self expands its body of sentience its body of energy or its body of intelligence. So, because everything is a mirror of everything else in the universe, the planetary energies are also existing inside of us. So, there's going to be aspects of our shadow that are in direct association with the different planetary energies that are existing in our solar system. In our solar system is a system of soul development that we go through on a soul level. That's why it's called a solar system, a solar system. And these planetary energies are also aspects of our energetic makeup, just like the archetypes. And this is why they're associated with our chakras. So each one of our chakras is actually governed by a planetary energy. So this is also very important to understand, because astrology isn't just something that's outside of you, but astrology is inside of you. And that's why these planetary energies have so much influence over the mass collective consciousness. The heavenly bodies are literally inside of you, and you can build a deeper connection with them by building a deeper connection with your shadow. So the solar system is actually inside of you. And as you're going through a process of soul development, this is going to become much more apparent to you. When you're connecting with these planetary energies within the self, you're also connecting with all the data, all of the information, and the overall accumulation of energetic resonance of the past and future timelines of that planetary consciousness, which is oftentimes going to be in association with extraterrestrial beings that may have or do interact with that level of planetary consciousness. So all of this is taking place inside of you within a layer of your own shadow self. And as well, you're connecting with the higher intelligence of that planetary consciousness. So all of this is accessible to you just by building a deeper connection with your shadow self. Now, going even deeper than the solar system and just the planetary energies in general, we actually move into the no self or the void self. And what this actually is, it's a paradox because there's no such thing as nothing. But the no self is the version of us, and it's the highest intelligence of our shadow self that actually contains everything within it. Everything in creation is in this version of ourselves, but typically it's in an unmanifest state where we're not gaining full access to it, and it hasn't necessarily become manifest within the physical universe. If you want to view it that way, it is still infinite probability and infinite potential laying or lying in a state of dormancy within us, waiting to become polarized light. And what polarized light is form. So everything in creation starts within the void. It starts within this womb-like space. It starts within the primordial chaos. So the higher intelligence of your shadow is actually the primal chaos aspect of yourself that gives birth to all of creation. It actually gave birth to what we know as the higher self. And whenever your higher self is creating something or expanding, it's expanding from this infinite probability that is existing within the higher intelligence of your shadow self in general. And we can say that this aspect of the self is another polarity of the higher self. So we can look at the higher self as the highest intelligence of what has become manifest within the tangible universe. Within, we can even say, the light matrix of creation, The shadow self is the infinite probability that has not necessarily become manifest yet, or this aspect of the shadow self is that infinite data and infinite probability that has not taken form of the polarized light. This is the unconscious of your shadow self. So if you understand the unconscious, you understand as human beings, all conscious experience, whether it's a feeling, whether it's a thought, or whether it's something in our physical reality, it starts as an energetic pattern within the unconscious that we just may not be aware of until it comes into conscious manifestation. Well, our higher self actually has an unconscious mind as well. The higher self is very knowing and very intelligent, far past our current intelligence right now, but it's not necessarily all knowing. Even the source consciousness, even what we can call the source, becomes more conscious through the versions of itself that it creates, which is just going to be anything that's in existence is a version of this source energy or a projection of the source energy that the source energy gets to expand its body of intelligence by creating and then having experiences through and existing through. Our higher self is a projection of the source energy. Alien intelligence is a projection of the source energy. A planetary body, a solar system, a galaxy is all a projection of this source energy consciousness. But everything comes into manifestation from that void space, and we can look at that in the context of what I'm saying as the unconscious of our higher self. So the higher self actually creates our soul through this void space, and then our soul comes into creation as a form of polarized light, and then we experience the many different incarnations that we experience as human beings. But as you can imagine, this unconscious space or this higher intelligence of the shadow self is very vast in its intelligence because it stores an infinite amount of data, so much that we call it the primal chaos space, because to our level of consciousness, even the level of consciousness of our higher self, which is a very evolved being, it seems like absolute chaos because there is just so much vastness, so much data, and so much intelligence that is there. So this is the overall intelligence of your shadow self. It is not just suppressed emotion. It is not just trauma. It is a vast intelligence that you can actually tune into to expand your own body of awareness and your own body of intelligence. I actually like to call this version of us the cosmic shadow because it is what gives birth to our higher self, and it's what gives birth to our individual soul structure. So by connecting with our shadow self in this way and understanding it from this lens, we are connecting with the totality of our evolutionary experience, even going past the development of our higher self. The higher self is going to be the totality of our evolutionary experience. But the shadow side of that higher self is actually taking it a step further and a step deeper than the totality of even the evolutionary progress of the higher self. So this is a very vast intelligence that is existing inside of us, and it's even more vast than the higher self intelligence. It is containing all probabilities and all possibilities. So that's kind of where I want to end the video. I wanted to speak about the not the higher self. I wanted to speak about the shadow self because I feel like the shadow self is often kind of more so understood in the lens of trauma, but it is so much more than just our trauma. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for being here.